statistical, we can say that techniques, other evaluation methods are employed to identify any trends, variability and potential issues in the historical data. If the retrospective evaluation indicates the process stability, reliability, it can be accepted and validated. Otherwise, additional validation activities may be required to ensure the process control and its compliance. Each approach to validation has its advantages and considerations. Retrospective validation, prospective validation ensures that the process is thoroughly evaluated and optimized before commercial production. What we are going to do before commercial production, we have to ensure all the process is optimized, well established, and the results are complying the specification. So concurrent validation provides real-time assessment and control during routine production. So what do the concurrent validation? It evaluates, it assesses the current, control and routine production. And retrospective validation allows for validation based on the historical data. The selection of the appropriate validation approach depends on the factors such as stage of the process, regulatory requirement and specific circumstances of the manufacturing condition. So relationship between the validation and qualification, if you want to say, many times we are saying that qualification, validation. In general, the qualification and validation follow similar underlying principles. The term qualification is normally used, for example, in case of equipment utilities, and validation, for example, for the system, methods and process. So qualification normally precedes the validation. You understood? The qualification normally precedes the validation. Qualification and validation should be performed in a structured way according to the documented protocol and procedures. So there should be a documented protocol, there should be a documented procedures, and qualification and validation as appropriate should be performed. Later on, we have to move for the qualification and validation should be performed. For new premises, new equipment, new utilities, for new system, new methods, processes, procedures, all these. When the changes are made depending on the outcome of risk assessment, when you are doing any changes in the process, that time you are going to do the risk assessment, where necessary or indicated based on the outcome of periodic review, and may include requalification and revalidation. Qualification and validation should be done in accordance with predetermined protocol and results appropriately documented in the record. What you need? Predetermined protocol. Before proceeding, before going to do any validation qualification, you should have predetermined protocol, and there should be a acceptance criteria, and on the basis of this acceptance criteria you should move for the validation or qualification. There should be an appropriate and effective quality management system supporting the organization, planning, execution and management of qualification and validation. What should be required? Effective quality management system. Effective quality management system means you should have SOP, change control, deviation, CAPA, risk assessment. All these SOPs should be in place, and that should be implemented at site. Any OS, OT including as well. Supporting the organization, planning and execution and management of qualification and validation. Qualification and validation should be performed in a structured way. You should not do any random situation. It should be a structured way according to the documented protocols and procedures. So the documentation, what documentation say? What type of documents we need? Documents associated with the qualification and validation may include validation master plan, standard operating procedures, specifications, protocols and reports, risk assessment, outcomes, process flow charts, any operation manuals, machine manuals, training records of the employee, those will be involved in the process, calibration records of the major equipment, instruments and its record certifications, sampling plans, how you will do the sampling, So sampling points, sampling plan should be there. Testing plan, methods, how you are going to do the testing, which pharmacopoeia use, what is the specification, statistical methods and results, and history of qualification and validation of the equipment as well as product. Plan for ensuring maintaining a validated state, including review of validation status. At least 3 consecutive applications of the validation or cleaning procedures should be performed and shown to be successful. Means you have to use the 3 consecutive applications, 3 batches, we can say that, for this validation procedure. Qualification and validation protocols, how we have to define and how we have to monitor and made it. It is like that there should be a qualification and validation protocol describing the qualification and validation to be performed, as a minimum what it should be, what it should cover, appropriate for the qualification or the validation to be executed, and may include the following significant background information. Means what you need, like that unique document number and version number of the document you should mention, protocol number, version number. If in future if you want to do something changes, it will change into version 2. Okay. A reference to the applicable standard procedure, equipment or instrument to be used, what equipment, which is the instrument, equipment code number, capacity, all this detail, make, model should be mentioned there. A reference to the standard as appropriate. If somewhere you need a reference, you should maintain. The stage of validation or qualification to be recorded. Stage means like granulation, compression, coating, packing, sealing, or this type of stages you should mention. So the process and parameters, sampling, testing and monitoring the requirement, all these things to be there. Stress testing, appropriate whereas applicable. Calibration requirement, predetermined acceptance criteria for drawing and conclusion. Change control, deviation. During the process, if you observe any changes in the standard, you can mention any deviation, any failure, you should record into the report. Attachment and reference to the attached document, including source data and archival and retention practices to be there. The protocol should be approved. What the protocol should cover? The protocol should be approved by the responsible person, including the unit quality, quality assurance head, quality head. Prior to use, any changes to a protocol should be approved prior to implementation of the changes. Means before implementation, your protocol should be signed off and approved by the authorized person. Qualification and validation reports should reflect the protocol. Means report always a replica of your protocol. Means in protocol there is mentioned to do activity, and in the report you will write down the outcome. So report should be reflected the protocols and procedure followed, and include at least the title, objective of the study and reference of the protocol. Reference to the appropriate risk assessment. If there is a major change, you have to go through the risk assessment procedure. So details of material, equipment, programs, cycles used. Cycles means suppose there are the different rotations, you can mention 20, 40, 60 like that, you have to mention there. Procedures and test methods, data, changes and the deviation, out of specification, non-conformances, result with appropriate traceability and the conclusion. You should mention there appropriate traceability results and the conclusion. Results should be recorded and in compliance with a good data practices and record management practices. So the results should be reviewed, analyzed and compared against the predetermined acceptance criteria. Whatever results we received, it should be checked against the predetermined acceptance criteria and accepted and statistically analyzed wherever appropriate required. The result should meet the acceptance criteria. Out of specification, out of limit, result should be documented and investigated properly as per site procedure. If we observe any out of specification observed, means during suppose validation you observe the out of specification result, so that time any OS OT you should be mentioned there in the report and investigated according to the appropriate SOP. If they are accepted, this should be justified. Where necessary, further studies should be carried out. In case of revalidation should be required or should be done based on the identified need principles of the risk assessment to be done and proceed. Any changes made to for example procedures, process, methods, if we did any changes in the procedure or process, should be managed through the change control procedure. Means suppose if you have changed the batch size, if you have changed the API, if you have changed the equipment, any changes, so or any excipient API, that should be recorded and that should be monitored through the change control procedure. So that is the importance of change control procedure. You have to go each and every change through the change control procedure. Without change control you cannot implement or proceed for the any changes in the process or the formula. The extent of validation and the revalidation as a result of such a change should be determined based on the principles of the risk assessment. Like sampling plan. So including the sampling points, number of samples, what is the frequency of sampling for each unit, operation, attribute, all this should be recorded in the protocol. The number of samples should be adequate and provide sufficient statistical confidence of the quality within a batch and between batches. The confidence level selected can be based on the risk analysis as it relates to the particular attribute under examination. Sampling during this stage should be more extensive than is typical during the routine production. Criteria for this process validation is, if we want to proceed for the validation, criteria and process performance indicators should be there that allow for the science and risk based approach about the ability to the process and consistently produce quality of the product, and it should meet the predefined standard as per our protocol requirement. The criteria should include description of the statistical methods to be used in the analyzing all collected data, statistical metrics, defining both in intra-batch and inter-batch variability, provision for addressing deviations from expected condition, and handling of non-conforming the data. Data should not be excluded for further consideration in terms of PPQ without a documented and scientific justification. PPQ means product performance qualification. The execution of PPQ protocol should not begin until the protocol has been reviewed and approved by appropriate department, including the quality unit. Any departure from the protocol must be made according to established procedure and provisions in the protocol. If you are recording all the details in the protocol, it should be followed, and if any stage we miss during the execution, it should be recorded in the protocol and report. And major changes you should not proceed prior approval of the approving committee or approving body. Normal operating conditions should include utility system like air, water, purification, material, personnel, environment and manufacturing procedures. State a clear conclusion. Your conclusion should be clear conclusion as to whether the data indicates the process met the conditions established in the protocol. Your conclusion should be very clear. All the results are complying the predetermined specification. That type your conclusion should be there. Confirmed conclusion should be there. And whether the process is considered to be in the state of control. If not, the report should state What should be accomplished before such a justification for the approval of the process? Release of the lots of products produced by it to the market in consideration